darlings. Good to see you. Let me just fix that there. Hello, hello. I am here, you are there, and we are all together. Goo goo gajoob. I'm Tad. I will be here reading until approximately 8 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. It is now 7 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, so that should give you a sort of a working idea of what we're talking about. I'm tired today. No major news, except for a large dog freak out last night where Johnny went up the hill, wouldn't come back down, spent the entire night sitting in the rain under the trees. Well, I suppose it only partial rain under the trees, but nevertheless, instead of being inside and being dry, Johnny prefers to go sit outside in the drizzle and the pouring, sleeting, whatever, no matter what. He would rather be out there than inside because I guess the noise of the rain on the roof makes him nervous, but the noise of rain on trees doesn't make him I don't know. I really don't. He's a dog. His way of thinking is different than mine, I suppose. But anyway, so he didn't get back until like 6 in the morning, at which point I had to get up, let him in, and towel him off because, of course, he was soaking wet and his mud up to his hocks and all that kind of stuff. So that was my night last night. Not to complain. As I've said many times before, it's the love tax. It's the price we pay for living with animals who are not always, we're not always able to communicate with them properly, or maybe we are communicating with them, but they don't care. They don't agree. So that was my night last night. Other than that, just cranking away on the third and final, at least for now, Ordinary Farm book, which, as I talked about last night a bit, I had a problem I've been trying to solve with that, and I think I've solved it, but I won't really know until I try it all on paper and see how it works. But I'm almost at the end of that and hoping to have that dealt with before we go out of town at the end of May. I'm hoping to have that complete and sent in, as well as various Navigator's Children related things. Isaac Stewart is waiting to work on the maps. Those of you who've been reading the books know what very fine work he's done on those, so I have to get him some sketches and, various other things, all the kind of domestic life stuff that one has with 4 children type people, although none of them are children anymore, but 4 offspring or wards or responsibilities scattered around the United States that have to be dealt with, and not dealt with in a negative sense, but dealt with in the sense of making sure that they are embarked upon their journey in life in a wholesome and healthy way, and they're not starving or without insurance or any of those kinds of things that we parents are often called upon to help with these days, because it's so damn hard for the young people to make a living and start an adult life these days because of various changes in the economy. Again, this is not the place where I talk politics, so I will not talk politics. But anyway, so those kind of domestic things still are there that have to be dealt with. And of course, I still have this hideous mess behind me, which has to be dealt with too. And various other things in correspondence with some of my friends, including one who will probably be checking in tonight about other projects and things. So that's kind of it. Nothing much to say. I think I will go and check and see who has showed up so far that might want to be said hello to. I see Ivan. Hello, buddy. I see Isaac. Hello. Good to see you. I see, stop that. What is this in my way? I see Margaret, although I've got a thing that says show start page over her name. Angie, hello. Claudia, pleasure. Ray Weatherford, hello, Ray. Tim Speckins, Kristen, hi, Kristen Rule. Barb Ann and Tracy McClatchy. Medardo, good to see you, sir. Un placer, como siempre. Emily, hello, Emily. You can hear a cat in the background there, I'm sure. Kelly and Christy and Susan Shamblin and Janice Ann Hampson And I think I've said hello to all the folks who've checked in so far. Yes, as you can hear in the background, the cats are feeling a bit cabin fevery, and they are a bit rowdy tonight, running around, chasing each other, etc. They are brothers by adoption, if not by actual genetics. So they have always been together. And that's one good thing when you have animals, that you have more than one animal, or otherwise you become their only companion, which is maybe what some people want. It is difficult, though, and it is a big responsibility. But our daughter, when she adopted the two of them together at the same time. And so as far as they're concerned, they are brothers, and they do entertain themselves, sometimes by wrecking things, which I don't know if there's much I'll be able to do about that. But again, the price you pay for the joy of living with animals, small, crazy, utterly dysfunctional animals of many kinds. And we are going through that all over the place. But like I said, that's what we chose. Let me think if there's anything else. I made the mistake because I was trying to find, again, all my books are in boxes, and I just haven't bothered to try to find them. But I had a thing today where I was trying to find one of my books of short stories and didn't have any luck. So I was thinking, oh, okay, I'll check online and maybe I can at least get a listing of where, what short stories are in the collections, so that I will, because I was trying to figure out a short story that I wanted to, I don't know, for lack of a better word, donate or use for a project. So I looked up Tad Williams short stories, hoping just to find a listing of my own stuff. And the first thing I found, or like the first thing up in the top, was, is Tad Williams alive? Which I had to stop, of course, and think for a moment, make sure that I was, in fact, before I laughed. And Whatever Happened To, that was another one. And they're all, it's like, never Google yourself. Never Google yourself. Either you're going to be disappointed because nobody knows or cares who you are, or you're going to be disappointed because half the people are going like, I never even heard of the guy, or, yeah, I remember reading him once, or, that kind of stuff. It's amusing, but it is also humbling. And I honestly am not that in need of more humility, folks. I have been humbled. Life itself humbles me. Cats humble me. Dogs humble me. My own children and wife all humble me constantly. My humility levels are up here. So come on, world, give me a break. No more of this. Is Tad Williams dead? No, I'm here. I'm in social media. I'm writing books. I'm publishing books. Thank God that people still want to read them. And so the answer to that question, until it is something different, for now, is always no. No, I'm not dead. Not even close yet, I hope. Anyway, so anything else that I need to share with y'all? Can't really think of anything. As I said, we're in kind of a trough here in a larger sense. I'm trying to finish some things and get some things done before embarking on a new one. If I'm still reading when I'm embarking on the new book, I will certainly be telling you about it as I get it started, and the various conundra, which I believe would be the plural, the various conundra that I will be working through in the process of writing the first draft. It's hard, though, because you don't want to give anything away to the people who actually, many of them can be expected to want to read the books when they're finished. So it's hard for me sometimes. But I can go back to some of my earlier books if anybody ever wants to ask questions and explain why I did certain things or whatever. I'm always willing to do that. As long as they're far enough in the past that I'm not spoiling anything for current readers. So anything except probably the current set of books that I'm working on, I'm happy to talk about. And even then, I would be normally happy to talk about 3 books back, except in this case, 3 books back is the first volume of something that is just going to be resolved and explained, and the mysteries solved, and the puzzles unpuzzled, and all that, when this book comes out in November, assuming that God does not strike my publication down in the same way that it happened last time. I'm assuming there's nothing wrong with it. It's all going forward, and I certainly have no reason to think otherwise. So, Navigator's Children on its way, another hefty tome, another large compendium of words from yours truly. Anyway, okay, is there anybody else I have to say hello to that I haven't said hello to? I see Joanna. Hello, Joanna. Good to see you. I see Carl. Hello, Carl. Good to see you. And Sandra. And there's Sandra. Hello, Sandra. A pleasure, as always, to have you with us. And for now, I will leave it at that. And I will start to read because I've got plenty of stuff to read. As always, because I write lots of pages. Okay, so, whoops, let's back up here a little bit. Last night, technically, or this morning, technically, I was reading a section where Soja was preparing to run away from her place, Vieki's house in Nakiga, because she was convinced, probably correctly, that Vieki's wife Kimabu would have her killed now that Vieki is out of town. And then after that, we also did the first part of this thing where Nezuru, who is Vieki and Soja's daughter, half-blood daughter, has been sent out with Jarnolf, the mortal, to go find some food for the camp. They are with the Queen's Talons, the Queen's Talon, and Nezuru saw a goat on a high precipice that looked large and presumably flavorful, and shot it with an arrow in a kind of a fit of hubris, showing what a good shot she was, and did not realize that, of course, the mountain goat was on the other side of the chasm, and they have no way to go and get it. To her extreme chagrin, she discovered that immediately. So, we are back to Nezuru and Jarnolf up in the hills, actually the higher than the hills, up in the mountains above the camp, and they have been hunting. "Do not tell the others," she pleaded. "Please say nothing." "You think I would sell your mistake to try to gain favor with your companions?" His expression was as flatly empty as any Hikadaya's. "I think you do not know either them or myself very well, Sacrifice Nezuru." Chastened and furious with herself, she now let him set the pace. Her thoughts remained tangled, but as time passed and Jarnolf said nothing, she managed to clear her mind enough to concentrate once more on the hunt. At last they found another goat, this one in a place they could reach. Nezuru again took the shot, Jarnolf insisted, and again it struck home. A short time later they had retrieved their kill and stood once more on relatively flat ground. Nezuru thought that the huge mountains seemed to be watching them, like cloaked gods against the gray sky, perhaps wondering why such strange tiny creatures trespassed in their domain. "There are dark clouds on the northeastern horizon," she said. "A storm is coming." "Right you are," said Jarnolf, "and this would be a bad place to be caught. I had hoped we might bring down a second goat to keep the giant sweet, but he will have to share with the rest of us." Nezuru and the mortal took turns carrying their kill across their shoulders as they made their way down the mountain. But the beast was heavy, and the footing became increasingly treacherous as the winds rose. Jarnolf at last dropped the carcass to the ground and began to drag it behind them, leaving a blood-tinged rut in the snow. "And now you see why we went uphill, not down," he said. "You have made your point, mortal," Nezuru told him. "You are a better hunter than this Hikadaya." "No, I am the more practiced hunter," he said. "You have a keen eye and light feet. Your aim is nearly faultless. But I have been keeping myself alive in the wild with only my own wits and my own weapons for many years. Even Mako, I think, has not had to do that. After long moments, silent but for the swish of the carcass dragging across the snow, Nezeru abruptly said, "You still have not told me all the truth." Jarnolf didn't answer immediately, which might have been because he was negotiating a difficult stretch of downhill climb, trying to keep the sliding weight of the mountain goat from dragging him over the edge. "Do you mean to ask, why am I still here?" he asked at last. "I gave your chieftain an answer to that days ago, whether you heard it or not, whether any of you believed it or not." So, the slow game still continues, she thought. "Do not treat me like a fool, Rimmersman. That was no answer, and you know it. Why did you save us? And why are you with us? Why did that bandit of the Scaliar recognize you?" "What do you wish me to say, woman of sacrifice? That you have plumbed my deepest secrets? That I left my task as Queen's huntsman, risking punishment so I could travel with your hand into the eastern wilderness? And why would that be? To enrich myself somehow? How would that work, pray tell?" "I don't know. But I do know that you have not told the whole truth. You recognized that bandit, the one with but one eye, and he recognized you. I saw. Do you deny it?" Jarnolf stopped. The dead mountain goat slid a little way farther down the slope. Its eyes were filmy, and its swollen tongue protruded from its mouth, as though the creature's downhill journey had exhausted it. "Why should I? Yes, I knew him. His name was Dermunder. We were companions for a while when I was young." Her heart sped with triumph and sudden alarm. "How can that be? You grew up in the slave barracks of Nakiga, or at least that is what you claimed." He shook his head. "I did not lie about that or anything else important. Yes, I grew up in a slave barn. And when I first became a Queen's huntsman, I used that opportunity to escape. Would you have done differently? Well, perhaps you would have. For a while after, I lived with the Scaliar, but their anger was not mine, nor was their fight." "What do you mean?" "Remember, please, that we are trying to outpace a storm," sacrificed Nezeru. "If we stand here until I answer all your questions, we will die. Surely they taught you that, whatever you may think, even the Queen herself does not rule the snow and wind. Not here." He began to make his way down the slope, forcing her to follow him to hear what he said. "The only one who could bespell the weather is gone, sent back to perdition at Azua." He smirked. "Do not look so surprised. Yes, I know of Azua and the Storm King. In fact, I have seen Azua, if only from a distance, which is more than I think you can say." She wanted to know more, but he was right. The darkening sky said they had only a little time. "We shall keep moving, then, but you will not silence me. So you were of the Scaliar once, those mortal bandits. Why did you leave?" "Because they were foul and cruel, and what they wanted was meaningless. Because they nursed old hatreds that had nothing to do with me, who was not born in Rimmersgard. My ancestors were slaves of Nakiga, and so was I. Why should I care whether Rimmersmen worship Eucires the Adon or the old gods they brought out of the lost west?" The sky was darkening quickly now, blackness swirling overhead like the smoke from a gigantic chimney. "So you returned into what you call slavery? That makes no sense. Why would you do that?" "Better a slave with a roof above his head, however crude, than a man lost in the wilderness, soon to starve or freeze. That was how it seemed to me." Jarnolf gave her a keen-eyed look. "But if we are to play this game of questions, then you must answer the same one that began the contest. Why are you here, Sacrifice?" That is a waste of a question, mortal. She lifted her hand to help him down a pile of snow-covered rocks and onto the ledge where she stood. For a moment, even through their gloves, she felt a strange, strong connection, and she spoke as much to cover her confusion as anything else. I was sent by the Queen herself. I am of the Order of Sacrifice. The Queen's word is as the beating of our own hearts. I'm sure, he said, letting go of her hand and reaching back for the goat's leg. He eased the carcass over the top, down the stones and onto the stony lip beside him. But that is not what I mean. The Queen herself chose you, a great honor, an astounding honor, and to die for the Queen is, I'm sure, your fondest wish. But why should the Queen, or whoever might have acted for her, choose you? I was first among my file in the Order of Sacrifice. I defeated 5 other sacrifices with only my hands. Ah, and did Mako do the same? In his day, yes. He is many years older than I am. And Keme? He is Mako's friend. He is also a fearsome warrior. A swirl of snow began to spin past them. Yes, he is, but otherwise not tremendously distinguished. In fact, Keme is as stupid as a bag of stones, and Saomeji, for all his subtlety, is also young, is he not? Not to mention that he is a half-blood like yourself. She wiped melting snow from her eyes with her sleeve. What do you reach for, slave-taker? Just a curious thing, this so important mission, which has seemingly taken you across the whole of the North, to this place where some say the last dragons live, and which is commanded by Mako, undoubtedly one of the fiercest warriors of your order, should otherwise be made up of such disposable minions. She was not certain what the mortal meant to suggest, but it made her furious. Why do you seek to undermine us, Jarnoth? What does it benefit you? Ask instead what your queen wants of you, sacrifice Sister Nezaru. Or rather, I suspect, what Akinabi wants, because from what I have seen and heard, it is his hand behind this mission, though he seems not to care if it fails. You dare, she began, but never finished what she meant to say, not because she hadn't puzzled it out yet herself, but because of the sudden appearance of a snarling white shape that fell onto Jarnal from above as if it had dropped out of the storm. For a moment, Nezaru saw nothing but a rolling, screeching ball of white that bumped and slid perilously close to the ledge's end. Some animal that had attacked them, perhaps a white wolf or a bear, but she could make out little of it in the fluttering snow except the red wetness of its maw as it tried to bite Jarnolf's face. She could not draw her sword swiftly enough to help. Already the mortal and his attacker had rolled too close to the edge, but one of her arrows had fallen from her quiver, so she snatched it up and thrust it as hard as she could into the bristling white back of Jarnolf's attacker, then pulled out another and plunged it into the hairy shape as well. She felt them both hit bone and then slide deeper, but the thing would not let go. She tried to struggle to her feet so she could draw her sword. "My knife!" Jarnolf gasped, twisting his head free from the claws of the furiously writhing animal. Nezaru saw the weapon on his belt, but before she could reach it, the two combatants rolled again and stopped part way over the edge, with Jarnolf on his back so that nothing lay beneath his head and shoulders but a deadly fall down the scarp. Nezaru finally managed to pull her sword, but for agonizingly long moments she could not use it, because man and beast were struggling so violently she feared she would stab Jarnolf instead. Or, with one shove of my foot, she suddenly thought, I could push them both over the edge. Just a brief instant, then it would all be over, and the mortal and his questions and his lies would trouble her thoughts no longer. Instead, she leaned forward, shielding her face from the flailing attacker, and groped until her hand found living fur. Then she set the point of her sword against it and pushed hard. The thing squealed, a rasping cry of fear and pain. She shoved the blade deeper. The creature struggled for a moment, trying to fight its way up the blade toward her, and for an instant she saw its face close up, the weird, whiskery snout too long for any wolf or bear. Then Jarnulf managed to get enough of a grip to shove the thing off him and kicked out with his booted foot. The beast slid from her blade as she clung to the hilt with both hands, then it tumbled over the narrow ledge and out into the void. For a long moment after the creature disappeared, they both lay panting at the edge of the precipice. Nezeru's legs and arms felt as boneless as mushroom stalks. Jarnulf choked and wheezed, trying to get his breath, then finally sucked in enough air to crawl farther from the drop. "What was it?" Nezeru asked at last. She rolled over and was relieved to see the dead goat still lying where they had dropped it. "Yukinva, they are called by the troll folk. A kind of giant rat of the snowy heights." He got up, absently wiping blood from his face. His skin had been torn in several places by the thing's claws and teeth. "It must have smelled the blood of our kill." "Then let's hurry and get back down to the cave before another arrives," said Nezeru. "We'll put snow on your scratches when we reach somewhere safer." Jarnulf got to his feet and knocked another arrow. "We won't bother," he said. "A little blood is a good sacrifice to the mountain gods, I think, and we should not spend more time out here than we need to." Nezeru had to admit that was an even better plan. Chapter 44. Charms and Tokens. The early days of Yuvan month had brought a flurry of rain. It took the visitors no little time to remove their dripping cloaks. Archbishop Gervas was accompanied only by a pair of priests, clearly suggesting the meeting would be an informal one. But when he had removed his outerwear, he kneeled before the king and queen and kissed each of their hands. Something that Miriamel could see made Simon restless, even anxious. "I don't know what it is with these religious fellows," Simon whispered to his wife as the archbishop retreated to his seat. "Always down on their knees, kissing something." On another day, Miriamel might have smiled or even laughed, but she did not want to be distracted now. She nodded to the archbishop and said, "It is good to see you, Eminence. I hope no sad errand brings you to us." "Would that it were a happier one, your majesty." Gervas, in all other ways almost the model of what an archbishop should look like. Tall, slender, and even-featured, with a fringe of snowy white hair showing below his mitre, had a habit of gnawing at his fingernails when he was distracted or worried. As Miriamel watched, he lifted one of his hands to his mouth before remembering where he was and quickly lowering it again. "But I come to you today not as Archbishop of Urchester, but as a humble servant of Mother Church and of our great father, Lector Vidian." "And away we go," said Simon under his breath. "As always," Miriamel said loudly, "you bring honor enough by yourself, Archbishop, but we are eager to know what his sacredness wishes to be made known." "Then let me move swiftly to the matter that brings me here." Gervas was clasping his hands together as though to thwart any treacherous move one might make toward his mouth. It was clear to Miriamel that he was more than just ordinarily disturbed by something, and she began to feel it herself as though it were a fever that could pass through the air. "You know of the troubles in Naban, of course?" "Naban? Nothing but trouble, most of the time," Simon said. "Seems like if they're not stabbing each other in the street, they're complaining about not being allowed to stab each other." "Yes, Archbishop, we are aware of the problems," Miriamel said, with a stern look at her husband. "The king and I have spent much time discussing the current situation, especially the conflict between Duke Saluceris and his brother Drusus. Does the Sacred Father have something to say on the subject?" Oh, much and much, your majesties. He is fearful for the state of the duchy, but even more he is fearful for the state of Mother Church and all Ostenard. Please explain, said Miriamel, and reached out her hand to Simon, ostensibly in the loving gesture of a royal wife, but really with the intention of giving his knuckles a hard squeeze if he didn't stick to the course they had planned. We are eager to hear what his sacredness has to say. There is nothing to hear from me, majesties. Lector Vidian has sent a formal envoy to you. He will arrive sometime in the next Senate, I am told. The archbishop looked a bit sheepish at this. I was informed so that I might prepare to welcome him. I do not want to tread on the privilege of his sacredness, but I believe it is in everyone's interest for me to tell you of this matter first, before the formal delivery of the Sancellan's request. And are you going to tell us what this request is? Simon asked. Or are we to play guessing games, like children at Aidenmansa trying to win a sweet? Ouch! The king scowled. You hurt my hand, woman. Many apologies, husband. I was distracted by an irritating noise. She smiled as sweetly as she could, then turned her smile on the archbishop. Forgive us, your eminence, for the interruption. Please continue. Between Simon's muttering and the seriousness of the matters discussed, it was all Archbishop Jervis could do to keep his hands away from his mouth. He pulled a ring of prayer beads from his pocket and began to tell them, one after another, around and around. Here is the root of the matter, majesties, he said. In Tyagaris month, the duke's brother, Drusus, is to marry Lady Turia, niece of Count Dallo in Gadaris. Oh, said Miriamel, genuinely surprised. Little Turia? I thought he meant to marry the older sister. Surely Turia is not old enough to be married. She will have 12 years that month, Majesty, which both custom and Mother Church accept. It is not the bride's age that concerns his sacredness, but the idea that the wedding will strengthen Drusus, because he will become, in effect, Count Dallo's son, and that it may be the occasion of even more serious fighting between the supporters of the Benedrivine and Ingadarine houses. I know a little something about this, Simon said abruptly. First, making Drusus his son-in-law won't change anything old Dallo's doing, because he's already backing him against his brother, the lawful duke. He held up his hand when the archbishop would have replied. And the lector himself, the sacred father, is a member of the Clavian family, as I recall, who have long been allied to Dallo and the Ingadarines. So why his sudden concern? The king turned to the queen. You thought I was not paying attention during all those council meetings, didn't you? The only thing missing was a childlike ha of triumph. Miriamel had no cheerful reply to that, so instead she turned to the archbishop. You were about to say something, Eminence? The beads were making a furious circuit through his fingers now. Yes, well, the king is quite right, of course, but that is part of the problem. You see, his sacredness is in an awkward position. Ordinarily, especially with the Sancellan Mahastrevis and the Sancellan Aedonitis, such close neighbors, he would have intervened long before when this conflict was first beginning. And do not misunderstand, your majesties. His sacredness has called for peace many times in the last year, tasking all parties with the disruptions and unhappiness caused by their fighting. But things are getting worse in Naban. Just a short time ago, the death of some Ingadarines led to rioting in the street, and Duchess Canthia, the duke's wife, was caught in it. She survived without harm, thanks to our merciful God, but it was a near thing. Well, I agree that we can't have these bully boy kingfishers and storm birds rioting in the streets, Simon said. But what can be done? The High King and High Queen can come to the wedding, said Jervis so hurriedly that it almost seemed he tried to gasp it out with insufficient breath. That is what the lector's messenger will request. His sacredness will work with Duke Saluceris and the other parties so that during your visit all will be brought to the table together, with your Majesty's presence to demonstrate the importance of concord. Agreements can be reached that will protect the peace. He took a deep breath and slipped his hand and the beads it held into a pocket of his robe. That is what the Holy Father will ask. I did not wish you to be surprised. Miriamele was, in fact, surprised, and for a moment she could think of nothing to say. A trip to Naban was a daunting thought with so much else already swirling around the high throne. Why can't the lector of Mother Church do this himself? Simon asked. What good is having a lector if he can't tell people to stop fighting? Isn't that what our faith teaches us, that the lector is the father of the world's family? Well, that's what a father does, stops the family fighting. The good God knows I've had to do it enough times myself. Only the Lord knows how many times I've had to give Morgan a talking to when he flouted his mother or grandmother. And only the Lord knows how little good it ever did, thought Miriamele. But you see, Jervis said, you already spoke the difficult truth at the heart of it, Majesty, when you pointed out that his sacredness comes from a house allied with the Ingadarines. Without the help of Count Dallo, the Holy Father would never have been elected by the Escritors to the sacred chair. Naban is a city, an entire nation, whose history has been written by the great family houses. Words are less than blood is one of their oldest expressions. Duke Saluceris and his supporters, well, they do not trust his sacredness to be fair to both sides. The beads came out again after only moments in his pocket. It will take someone from outside to make peace. But I myself am related to the Ingadarines, Miriamele pointed out. Archbishop Jervis shook his head. Your rulings on matters pertaining to Naban have always been fair, Majesties, and it is known that despite your Ingadarist blood, you also have an attachment to Saluceris's Benedrivines. Because without Duke Saluceris, the whole country will turn to shit, said the king, and didn't seem to notice the archbishop nearly drop his beads. He is the closest thing Naban has to a man who puts what is best for the people ahead of his own desires. This time Miriamele did smile a little, although she was not entirely pleased with her husband's contributions. Jervis clutched his beads in both hands, as if they were a floating spar, and he was lost at sea. Yes, I'm sure your Majesty is correct, the Archbishop said through a wince. But I am certain you and the Queen will need to discuss this matter in private, so I will take my leave. The Holy Father's legate is already on his way. Do you know who it is? Miriamele asked. Escritor Auxis, I am told. It was clear that the Archbishop was pining for the security of St. Sutrans. He is a goodly man, godly and fair-minded. I'm sure, said Miriamele. Thank you for sharing your concerns with us, Your Eminence, another of your many services to the high throne. When Jervis had departed, Simon turned to her and said, Well, a lot of nonsense, isn't it? The Nabani are always squabbling. Rachel the Dragon used to say the Hernestiri liked hunting best, the Erkenlanders liked fishing, but the Nabani preferred arguing to all other sport. Miriamele gathered her dress and rose from her chair. I don't think the mistress of chambermaids however much she may have meant to you, is the best guide to the strife of nations." "By all the bloody saints, what have I done now?" Simon called after her. "You are angry again, aren't you, Miri?" "Miri!" Next section. 29th day of Yuvin, founding year 1201. My dear Lord Tiamak, greetings to you. Oops, sorry, I just went back a page. Greetings to you, and I hope this finds you well. Since this is a letter, I'm not doing Eitan's accent, dialect, whatever you want to call it. Greetings to you, and I hope this finds you well. The ship that will take me to Naban and then on to Quanitopul leaves this afternoon, so I will try to finish this in time to give it to the royal post before I embark. The first part of my journey was largely uneventful, but I fear I will never make a traveler. The trip down the Glenawent had a most grievous effect on my innards, though the river pilot kept assuring me that the waters were unusually smooth, and it must have been something I ate. That is not impossible, because what I was given to eat on board the river ship seemed to be as much beetle parts as biscuit, but I fear I may suffer from a more general indisposition to traveling on water. I am not looking forward to the longer trip, although the abbot here at St. Salimo's has kindly informed me that, except for an unusual amount of activity among the Kilpa, the seas are calm at this time of the year, and my journey should be a good one. I have never seen a Kilpa, but I confess that after hearing some of the rivermen's tales, I am in no hurry to end my ignorance. Lest you think that I have nothing but complaints to share, my lord, Merimond is a very goodly city, and I am pleased to have finally seen it. As we approached, I could see its white towers from a great distance, standing high above the walls. The harbor is very large, with cunning canals to allow the ships to come very close to the warehouses, where most of them load and unload cargo. I could not disembark immediately because my own small pile of belongings had somehow been put behind a large quantity of barrels, and my guide, your friend Mahdi, was nowhere to be found. Remembering what you said about experiencing more of the world, I should mention that as I waited, I was able to learn a number of new words that, although common among rivermen and dockside laborers, are not generally heard among the monks of St. Sutrans. At last my belongings were found and cheerfully tossed out onto the dock. As I stood beside them, waiting to see if Mahdi would be thrown onto the dock as well, I was accosted by two of the dirtiest children I have ever seen. So ill-kempt and filthy were they that at first I thought they might be southern apes, such as I hear the mariners sometimes make pets of, and even dress in clothes. In fact, I doubt many sailors dress their apes as poorly as these children. Even as I looked them over, these two creatures ran at me, and, evidently mistaking me for someone else, began to paw and embrace me, all the time calling me "good old uncle," although I had never seen them before in my life. When I noticed that the smaller of the two, a girl, somehow had her hand deep in the pocket inside my robe and was attempting to lift my purse from it, while the boy had hooked one of my small trunks with his foot and was pushing it away from me even as he hugged and petted me, I realized that not only were they not confusing me with someone else, they actually meant to steal my possessions. I engaged in a struggle with the girl, and though she was but a slight thing, with a wrist no wider than a half man's a candle, while I arrested her removal of my purse, I could not induce her to let go of it. We stood there for long moments, and to an outsider it must have looked like some strange dance, me clutching one child by the arm while trying to yank the other back from the trunk he was trying to shove beyond my reach. At last someone called, "Children, stop that!" And, to my relief, they did, but not before the girl made one last attempt to slip the purse out, which I thwarted forcefully enough that she kicked my shin. My rescuer turned out to be Mahdi, and instead of telling me where he'd vanished to, he said, "I see you've met my lovely young ones. Plek, Parlip, give his worship room to breathe, my dear little fleas, or I'll smack the skin off you. I was a bit taken back to learn these apes were his. He told me their full names were Plecto and Parlippa, the latter I assume named after beloved Saint Pilippa. I was even more startled when Mahdi let slip the information that they would be accompanying us on the journey to Naban. When I said, and rather firmly, that you had told me nothing of any children, Mahdi sadly bowed his head and said that he had no choice, that the children's mother had demanded it. She's ill with the summer ague, my darling, he explained, and cannot even get out of her bed. The older ones are trial enough, she says, and I am to bring these two with me. I feel I must note that among his other habits, my guide refers to everyone he meets as darling, my dear, sweetness, or my love. Perhaps it is common among the Hirka, but it seems to me an odd way to address strangers. So it was that I was led away from the Merriman docks by Mahdi and his two young charges, and although the children helped me to carry my belongings, they also made free with my possessions when their father was not looking, which seemed to be often. I still have not found my candles. Instead of leading me to Merriman's main Agarine Abbey, where I had planned to spend the night, and where you told me the abbot was expecting me, Mahdi insisted on bringing me to his own house, a ramshackle dwelling in a neighborhood called the Stews, to meet his family. This despite the apparently dreadful illness suffered by his wife. I call her such because charity demands it, but I suspect no Adonite vows were ever exchanged. Once inside, I was reminded again of my first impression, that the children were in fact apes. The rest of the children at home were larger, but no better dressed, and no better in their manners. The oldest, a homuncule of Mahdi himself, but with wispier whiskers, asked me what terrible secrets I learned by listening to rich women giving their confessions. Mahdi asked me for a loan of a few coppers, so that he could buy some meat for the pot. But after I gave it to him, he was gone a long time, leaving me with the loud, boisterous children. Their mother remained under the covers, groaning that she was dying, though with such a strong voice that I doubted it. And when he returned home, he had the distinct semblance of someone who has drunken several beers. Nor did I ever see any sign of meat in the soup I was served. Although the bread was hard enough, I was just as grateful not having anything else to chew, for fear my teeth would not survive the meal. A bed was made for me in the middle of the floor, the blanket so flea-ridden that I could hardly sleep at all. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by a small hand touching my face, and when I sat up in alarm, discovered the boy Plecto, who told me that he thought there were robbers trying to get in. Worried for the family, I roused myself and looked around, but found no sign of intruders. When I returned, I found the boy rooting through my possessions again. When I demanded that he stop, he saucily asked me what I was hiding that I was so secretive. My good Lord Tiamak, I think that your trusted guide, Mahdi, is not so trustworthy as you thought, or at least his family is not. Should I find another guide instead? I fear we will have to leave Merriman before this will reach you, but perhaps you can send a letter for me to Quanitapool, advising me what to do. Against Mahdi's urging, I moved the second night to St. Agar's and found there much more comfortable surroundings. In fact, I have been at the abbey since, and this letter is written in the refectory, which is wonderfully free of vermin. Best of all, the abbot kindly gave me permission to use the abbey's library, and I found something of interest there. The book of which we spoke before I left the Hayhold is not to be found here, of course, but I did discover a volume by Tertissus of Gemia that discusses it. He says, quote, "The great sin of Fortis is not that he describes the devilish methods of the old ones, by this he means the Norns and their cousins, the Scythi, but that he speaks of those methods as though they can teach something to godly men. These snares of the devil have driven men mad before. It is said they drove Bishop Fortis himself mad, and it is rumored that he spent his last days in confinement in his own abbey. I tell you this, Lord Tiamat, not because I think you do not know the dangers already, but because I fear for any others who might come into contact with it. Have you told the king and queen? I know they would be most anxious for any knowledge of their son, even this, but I would feel very sad if they were exposed to this dreadful book because of me. Also, although I went to the Princess Idela to examine Prince John Joshua's books on Lord Passavali's behalf, in the course of many distractions and worries in those days, I never told Passavalis what I found. I leave it to you whether he should know about it. Do please advise me whether I should seek a new guide when I reach Quanitapul. I remain your servant in God, Etan Fratilis Erchestris. Well, said Angus. Tiamat looked up more than a little startled. Although he had been reading aloud, he had all but forgotten that he had company. Well, what? Am I going to tell Lord Passavalis about the treatise? I think not. I think that I will speak only to those who need to know. Like the king and queen. Yes, eventually. But before I worry and upset them with news about their dead son, I would like to know a bit more about the book and take time to review the rest of his library. Angus stretched his arms. His large wooden chair, which his servants had erected in a spare bedchamber, with all the ceremony of builders raising a miniature cathedral, took up a great deal of room, and although it could be wheeled from place to place, it took 2 men to do so, 3 if Angus was in it. This made for many complications, but Tiamat did not mind them, because there were few scholars in all of Ostenard who knew more about forbidden and ancient books than the former Viscount. In any case, Angus went on, all this about the book was not the question I was trying to ask you, dear fellow. I wanted to know whether you had intentionally given poor brother Etan into the hands of Thirka thieves. Oh, that. Tiamat made a sour face. I am not pleased to hear about Mahdi's family, nor do I doubt I will be dunned for the miserable night's lodging he gave brother Etan. Despite what Etan has seen, though, I think Mahdi is a good man. I have known him for years, ever since my first journey back to Quanitapul. He is a bit of a rascal, and clearly not the best father, but I swear his heart is good. I have known him a long time. Angus rearranged the treatise atop the large board that lay on his armrests as a makeshift table. And you're certain there's no one else you wish to bring into our discussion, like Lord Passavalis? I am fairly certain, yes. Lord Chancellor Passavalis is a good man, a very clever man, too. But I think that the fewer folk who know we have this book, the smaller the chance of it slipping out by mischance. Besides, Passavalis is a devout Adenite. I do not wish to demand his secrecy and pit his faith against our friendship. But your own faith does not trouble you about it. Tiamat smiled. My faith, old friend, applies only to Ranneman, and is all but mute on the subject of drylanders, let alone the Scythi. He who always steps on sand and joins us to seek boldly, but not to abandon caution entirely. I think that makes for a reasonable approach. Why do you ask? Just curious. The book, what little of it I've managed to translate, is full of ideas both inspiring and terrifying. Lucky for you that you have no faith to be outraged. Oh, I have faith, Angus said. Would you hand me my cup? Bless you. I have faith that mortal men cannot be trusted with gold or with power over other men. I have faith that learning will always frighten stupidity, and that stupidity will often strike back, sometimes murderously. He took the cup from Tiamat. Because he could not easily lift it to his lips, he sipped instead from the hollow reed, drawing watered wine to his mouth. Now, shall we continue? Tiamat smiled again. You renew my own faith that some things truly are eternal, Angus. You are as cynical as ever you were. More so. My cynicism grows like a weed. Someday it will choke all the weaker flowers like charity and hope that live in my garden. He cleared his throat. Now, be quiet if you wish me to read this to you. Beside these great scrying stones, which the elders only may use, there are other charms and tokens that can carry such whispers through the etheric fluids and across great distances. It is said that some of the adepts can speak not just over earthly spans, but across the boundary or veil between the world of living and the cloudy halls of death. Next section. God give you good day, Your Majesty. Simon looked up. Ah, Lord Passavalis, good to see you. And you, Majesty, may I trouble you for your royal hand and seal on these? The king shuffled through the curling rolls of vellum. What am I signing my name to? Passavalis smiled. A dozen different things, all of them rather boring, as you may see if you examine them. Confirmations of land titles, a report from the Royal Mint, 3 petitions begging you for tax relief, and, of course, the letter from our ambassador at the Sansellen Maestrevis about the visit of Lector Vidian's legate. I showed you that already. The king frowned. Bloody tree. Forgive me, Passavalis. I forget myself when I'm vexed, and this matter is vexing me fiercely. Why must I sign something for our own ambassador? The damnable legate is on his way, whether I want it or not. I took the liberty of writing a reply for you to Count Froya, thanking him for his letter. These are the things I must do with Count Eolair, gone from the castle. Simon thought he heard a note of self-pity. And you do them very well, man. I realize we ask a great deal of you between the chancellery and all else that has fallen to you with the hand of the throne gone off with the prince. Don't think the queen and I will forget this service. Passavalis looked down. You are kind as always, my king, especially to one as unworthy as myself. I have already been given a gift by you and the queen greater than any I could have hoped to receive otherwise, just by the bestowal of your trust. Good God, man, you talk like all the other courtiers around here. Don't start complimenting me too much, or I won't trust you anymore. It's your honesty I crave. No king, or queen for that matter, can live without honesty from at least one person they trust. I hear your rebuke, sire, he smiled. I will strive to tell you more unpleasant truths. Simon laughed. That was good. More unpleasant truths. But you are surely fortunate, sire, that you have a queen who is both honest and extremely wise. And I do not say that to flatter. No, you're right. The problem with my Miri is that when she's angry at me, I don't want to listen to her good advice because it makes me feel like a fool. You have my sympathy, Majesty. And you have never married yourself, Passavalis. Can you find no one who appeals? From what I hear, there are many ladies here in the court who have set their caps for you. I am married to my work, Your Majesty. It leaves me little time for things like a family. But what of the future? What of your name? By now his smile had vanished. My
family name, I am afraid, likely died with my uncle, the Baron. Perhaps someday, when my labors are over, or at least have become less all-consuming, I will think about changing that. There's no shame to waiting, Simon said hurriedly. Don't get me wrong. Dear old Tiamat is older than I am, and he married only a few years ago. He's as happy as can be. Lady Thalia is a fine woman. She is. But Simon was a bit confused now. Had he offended his Lord Chancellor? He hadn't meant to. Perhaps Pasquale was one of those men who didn't like women. Simon had always found the idea strange himself, but it seemed too commonplace to be merely sin. God had made all kinds of people upon his earth, from Simon's old harper Sangfugel, who even in his old age still had an eye for attractive young men as well as women, to those like Archbishop Jervis, whom Simon had once seen walk past a drunk, half-naked woman without even noticing her as she lay singing on her back in Market Square. Despite his own marriage and his still powerful desire for his wife, the dark secrets of the bedchamber often confused Simon. If God had meant the act to be only between married men and women, why did he fill the world with so many temptations? Why did he make the desire so strong and the act so pleasurable? I'm going to stop there because it's already 8:01 and there's no immediate end to this scene, which is going to go on, I think, for a few more moments. Yes, it goes on for a few more moments. Actually, more like 5-6 more minutes, and I'm not going to read that. Okay, why did that go on? I don't want that on. Anyway, sorry, I'm still thinking to myself, and I'm trying to make sure that I have a... Okay, there we go. Alrighty, sorry for the confusion there. I just had to make sure that I had a bookmark there so I could find my place again next week when I have forgotten everything that I was doing, as is commonly the case. Okay, so with that, I say thank you very much for joining me. Great pleasure as always to see you and to hear from you, albeit indirectly or virtually or whatever. Take good care of yourselves, your friends, and loved ones. I am going to go upstairs and find out what the dog was barking at, and I'm hoping it was pizza. And I will be back next week, same TAD time, same TAD channel, 1 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Y'all take care, peace, and see you soon.